Hey everyone, in this episode we're finally going to be replacing our ugly weapon by adding a high quality weapon mesh. The next 4 or 5 videos are going to be about improving the look of our weapon. So let's look how we can replace this box right here. If you're not working with a weapon that you created yourself, there are a couple of different places that you can find weapons. You can go to places like Sketchfab or Blender Markets, the Fab Asset Store. I'm going to be working from this model right here by DJ Mason. Do note that when you are looking for these types of models, to look at the license here. This is a Creative Commons attribution, so it can be used in commercial or non-commercial projects as long as you attribute it to the original author. It's always important to recognize any external assets or anything that you use. DJ Mason's got some really cool models in here. I really like really high quality work. So do check them out on Sketchfab. They also have a way to support them through Buy Me a Coffee. When you're downloading the model, I usually like to go for the GLB file. Sometimes you'll get different texture sizes that you can use. 1K is totally fine. I went ahead and did the 2K. You're going to download that. And then I also will import this into Blender because I don't want any animations tied to this. We're going to be doing our animations procedurally through code. I just want the one joined single mesh. A couple of things that will help when you export. If you go to the GLB export, make sure that you're only selecting the actual mesh that you want to export. Sometimes you'll get additional things that will make the import a little bit messier. So I join the parts that I want and then limit the export to the selected objects. I also uncheck animation. And then within the armature, if you're using a model that has a hand or an arm or 2 hands and 2 arms, a lot of the time those will have a rest position because they're using a skeletal armature. The use rest position armature is usually checked when you're exporting. You want to uncheck that. So whatever frame you're currently in will be the frame that gets exported and not the rest position. Also make sure that there aren't any modifiers that are being enabled and that you just apply those if they need to be applied. Once you have that set up, you can put that into your Godot project. Now, when you import that GLB, you should get the GLB file and then a bunch of different images that would be for the material setup. If you double click on that GLB file, you're going to get the import screen and it should look something like that. That's what we're going to use for our gun mesh. You shouldn't see any animation nodes. Also note the root scale. Sometimes these meshes are huge and they're not really fitting whatever your proportions are within your project. You can adjust that by going to root scale so your transform isn't super tiny. I did a 0.1 on this just to get it within the range, and we can re-import that. And then currently we have our pistol weapon scene. I'm going to go to that. I'm just going to drop in that GLB file. Now you can see how huge that is. So we can reduce that, bring it down, roughly kind of the size of that. I think 0.1 is going to be all right. We can kind of shift that around, which we'll do. The old setup was a quick setup. We just had the mesh instance as the root. We're going to change this because we don't want that mesh anymore. Change it to a node 3D. We can keep the pistol weapon. And then the hero gun, that scene is just going to be the visual aspect of our weapon. In the future, we'll have more pieces to this. And in fact, we can even do a weapon instantiated scene and have it inherit from one another if you wanted to make it really clean. But for now, we're just going to pop that in so we get the visual of it. And then go back to our player controller because this is where we've set up. You can see already we're pointing the gun at ourselves. We need to flip this around. So we'll go back to our hero gun. We'll add a rotation to the y-axis to flip that around. And then also while we're here, let's take note of our origin. So this will make a lot more sense when we're getting into the procedural movement stuff. But there's a point where you want a weapon to sort of pivot from. And this is a really excellent origin point. You don't want the origin point, if I shift this up, to be like at the arm or the tip of the gun, because when this thing rotates or shifts or move, it's going to look a little weird. So this is a good approximate origin point for right now. Let's go back to the player controller, and already that's looking pretty good. We can save that. We have a test just to see where this kind of ends up being. Let's open up, run the game, and let's see where this ends up. And already that's not too bad. Now let's say you didn't like the placement of this and you wanted to adjust that. So if you remember from the weapon setup, we have our weapon resource. And within that weapon resource, we have a weapon position. That weapon position accounts for the XYZ in relation to the camera. So when you set up your weapon scene, your actual visual mesh is just going to be at the 0, 0, 0 origin, and then you're going to adjust where that is in relation to the camera within the player controller. So in our little test weapon here, which we're using to test it in the editor, we have our position up here, which I think should be the same. It is. So let's say I wanted to adjust this look. Let's say it's maybe a little bit too centered. You can shift that over, maybe to like 1, no, that's a little bit too much. 0.17, 0.16. We can copy that value. We go back to our resource for that weapon and paste that value in. We save that, and there you go. So you can use the transform, maybe even name this like test weapon or something like that, and then that's how you can adjust that value. So that should enable you to add in a better looking model, replace our ugly looking cube, and get a true weapon, even a hand weapon in your game. And now that we have this in here, we're going to start making this look a lot better with some visual juice. So in the next episode, we're going to add an idle sway, and we're going to be talking about springs, because I've come to love using springs over lerps, and I think you will too. As always, you can get the project source files on my Patreon. Stay tuned for the next episode, and as always, keep creating.